the state apology to abuse survivors that happened. Yesterday at Parliament, the Prime Minister and a number of others, he wasn't the only person to speak yesterday, rendered an official apology to those who had been abused in care. And they, just to go through some of the people that were there, it was Oranga Tamariki, so they still call it Oranga Tamariki. I thought we were changing the names, but I guess it's the Ministry for Children, the Ministry of Health, the New Zealand Police, the Ministry of Education, also there is apology. Gosh, it must have been a long bloody speech. As did the Public Service Commissioner and this is the interesting one, Una Jagos, the Solicitor General, who drew some ire from some participants. It was interrupted the Prime Minister's speech by a complete dickhead, and nothing to do, I have to say, with the abuse survivors, but just, professional dickhead. But as a general rule, it did not land well. A law firm working with survivors of abuse in state cares yesterday described the apology from the Prime Minister and from the government as tone deaf and not survivor focused. And as part of that law firm, one of those representatives of those who have been abused in state care, Lydia Oosterhoff, we've talked to her a lot. The last time I talked to her, we said what would be a sum of redress. She joins us now. Lydia, welcome to the show. Good to have you on again. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Lydia, yes, I can. One of the things, listen, don't get me wrong. I just want to check something with you, if I'm a survivor or not. I went to a state boarding school in the 1970s. I was physically and sexually abused. Do I then qualify as as an abuser, as a victim under the inquiry orbit?
It depends what kind of school it was and whether the school is still open. The MOE system is quite complex, but yes, if you were a survivor of physical and sexual abuse at the hands of what's called a responsible adult, so that's someone who is supposed to be caring for you, so then yes, you would be classed as a survivor of abuse and care. Okay,
so just let me get this right. So if I was then also, and I had a boys' home that was just down the end of my street in Wanganui, in a place called Tawero in Gomville, in Wanganui.
I've heard of it, yes.
There's a boys' and a girls' home there. Everybody knew that it was a bad place to be or end up, and they used to come to my school. If I was abused, and I say I was a girl, which would not be uncommon, and I was abused sexually by boys who were in residence at the neighbouring boys' home, would I be adjudged a victim as well?
So that depends. So the Ministry of Social Development, which would be the agency responsible for boys and girls' homes, would not class you as a survivor, because they would not, anyone can be classed as a survivor, but you would not be entitled to redress because that MSD would not consider that you were closely enough associated with that boys' home, and that the staff at their boys and girls' home had control over what those over you and over what it's
Because it seemed, I was going through and speaking yesterday over the last couple of weeks to a number of people, and it seemed to me that there was an almost arbitrary division between who was a victim and who wasn't.
There is. I agree with you. Yeah. So, and we've been having this argument a lot with, especially MSD, because what they can define as a responsible adult is very arbitrary. And up until very recently, MSD didn't take responsibility for what's called 396 providers. So that's iwi program providers, providers such as whakapakari, because they said that was a contract for service that was provided. And what we know from the Royal Commission and what we know from our own work, because we've worked with a lot of survivors from whakapakari, is that actually they were paid by social welfare or SIFs. They were placed there by SIFs, and they were placed there to care for children who had been taken away from their families, or had been placed in the custody or on remand by SIFs. Yet MSD said they weren't responsible for these people's actions.
Okay, and that's where the 200,000 comes from, isn't it? I mean, I think a lot of people thought when that figure was bandied around by the Royal Commission, 200,000, oh, that's a lot. But it obviously excludes large numbers of people and includes large numbers of people as well. What is the definition again, please, of a victim of state abuse? How is it defined? Do I have to be abused by an adult who was funded by the state or a care institution, or both?
Well, yeah, so each ministry or government agency has its own definition, but the largest cohort is the Ministry of Social Development, and the Ministry of Social Development defines it as abuse or neglect by a responsible adult. So that's someone who is paid for by social welfare, to put it in the simplest possible words.
Right. And this is where we go. Yesterday, the press release that's come out, I think, from your law firm described the apology yesterday as tone deaf and not survivor focused. There has been that criticism, which was relayed on many of the media that came out from those survivors who were present, or even those who weren't present for yesterday's apology, in a variety of places. The Prime Minister yesterday announced a sum of money. I think it was $32 million and $2 million. $32 million to look towards redress for those survivors, and then I think $2 million to look towards legal fees or something like that as well.
And that's not quite how we...
Okay, you explain to me then what you understand.
Yeah, so we understood that $32 million was to go towards further funding the historic claims units within the ministry, so to provide further resource. So we understood that as staffing costs, administration costs for those ministries, and $2 million for supportive services for survivors.
Right, so the $32 million of funding, you're right, is to increase capacity and get through claims faster, yeah? Okay. What's wrong with that?
Well, it's not going to survivors, is it? It's, as we see it, very cynically, is that this is a move to try and settle as many claims as possible in the forthcoming future, to get survivors to sign full and final settlement agreements that then prevent, if a independent redress scheme is created, at the moment, as the full and final agreements stand, if survivor has to sign that if a independent scheme allows it, they could possibly open their case in future. So how we see it cynically is this money is going to go towards hiring as many staff as possible, pushing through as many settlements, so that if an independent redress scheme is created in the future, this will not allow people who have already received settlements to access it, except potentially for supportive services, so preventing further compensation down the track.
Okay. Why? Okay, I used me as an example. Why would I be compensated for something that happened, in this case, in 1974, 73 and 74? Why would I be compensated for that when the victims of crime who had similar people children who had sexual or violent crimes inflicted upon them are not compensated at all?
Well, I mean, they can be compensated if they were to take a civil claim against the abuser. However, unfortunately, in most cases, they don't. Yeah, or they don't have money. So, and that's the problem is with civil liability, is that with the state, and the thing is, the state has a duty of care. The state has a statutory duty of care, especially in terms of the Ministry of Social Welfare, so SIFS, or Rangatamariki as it's called now, has a statutory duty of care to ensure that children are safe and protected from abuse. So there's actually a legislation that says that what the state did to these children was in breach of the law. So there's a bigger civil liability. So you're
saying there's a greater responsibility upon the state and state agencies than there is upon individuals?